adjusted the translocation paths to his own specifications, of course. Orokin was reckless, not dull-witted, but there had been a chance some infinitesimal variable would mar his transit. A chance that, instead of the glowing tunnels of the webway, he could have sprung back into reality, in the heart of a star, or floating in deep space between dimensions. Even absent those extreme cases, there was every possibility he would come out at a random point in space-time, forced to adjust and use the beamer again and again, hoping the increasingly wild translations would bring him home, and not to realities increasingly aberrant from his own. That would not have been ideal, but also not a tragedy. After all, Orokin had time. But his astromantic divinations proved true enough, and his translation landed him in a disused portion of the webway. Not the exact point he'd intended, unfortunately, but close enough. Then again, it was possible it was exactly the spot he'd meant, but that the network had changed into something unrecognizable. With the webway destabilized, it was increasingly difficult to tell. The Odari's great cataclysm had rocked the network to its foundations, snapping away arcways that used to see fleets pass, and flinging them into the immaterium. Unthings from that dimension of madness increasingly stalked the corridors, and every cycle, the Odari's witch-seers collapsed more pathways to keep the evils out. Orokin had wound through the coils of the labyrinth dimension, clearing passages and lurking in shadows. What remained of the old enemy's civilization was in flight. Neo-primitives, like the ones Trazyn had pillaged, migrating to new homeworlds. Vicious raiders, hunting their own, all societal bonds broken. Refugees, eyes hollow with fear, hurtling helter-skelter through the halls without regard for where they headed. Orokin did not blame them. After all, what the young race birthed had shaken him so badly he needed a century of meditation to recover, and he'd merely glimpsed it via astral precognition. The Odari's time upon the stage was ending in an era of lamentation and horror. "Fair comeuppance," he'd said, upon witnessing his first group of refugees, "for what your decadence has unleashed upon the galaxy." Slithering between the chaos, the doubling back and hiding turned a 1-month transit from Solemnes to Mandragora into a 9-year odyssey. 3 cycles alone had been spent burning his way through a winding corridor, infested with carnivorous fungoid blooms. His carapace bore new scars, talismans of an unfortunate encounter with Drakari incubi, and his power plant needed refurbishment. But mostly, he required time for meditation and study. Now, atop his astromancer's tower, he watched the stars, sensing gravity's pull on the transit of planets, its infinite algebraic possibility influencing even the smallest events in the galaxy. The astronomers of old, stupid and superstitious as they had been, had guessed at this connection. But their pathetic spirituality had little to do with the scientific precision Orokin now used to chart the pull of gravity and the flow of particles, the bending of space-time around sucking black holes, the chain of bizarre causality that could turn a breath on one continent into a typhoon on another. And those lines of power, light, energy, and time, tended to snare around certain objects, like the one that floated, slowly turning at the center of the observation deck. Jade shadows underlit it from the suspensor field beneath, and phosglyph equations and grids, written on the very air, surrounded it in a cloud. Lines traced from each theorem to the multi-sided surface of the Astrarium Mysterios. Autonomic calculators measured and remeasured each face, edge, and vertex. There were 8, 12, and 6, respectively. A perfect octahedron. "Which is puzzling," he said aloud to the Mysterios, "because according to my engrammatic banks, you were a pyramid when I left Solemnes." He tried to review his mnemonic data and pinpoint the exact moment of his transmutation, but it was useless. The mirrored geometry of the webway, especially since the cataclysm, fouled his recall systems into a dreamlike blur. "You have undergone a transmutation. No surprise, as that is your function. But exactly when did you change?" he asked, rhetorically. It was sometimes easier to think aloud, split his consciousness into a portion that stimulated questions and a portion that searched for possible answers.
What was the catalyst for this transmutation? What was the method?
Spectromantic analysis indicated a device composed of solid, living metal. The same substance that made up the tower, his staff, Orokin's own necrodermis. There were also trace amounts of mercury, an unknown crystal buried in its heart. Strange. Not standard components in Necron technology. Little wonder Trazyn, blind to the metaphysical and lacking imagination, labelled it a forgery. Even those initiated into the cryptech mysteries, if they lacked sufficient study and insight, would have thought the same. Orokin had possessed the Mysterios for a decade, and he still could not ken the basics of its operation. Perhaps it was time-dependent, gradually opening as the eons ground on, ensuring that the shorter-lived races would never access its secrets.
Conversely,
he mused, the answering part of his consciousness taking over,
it is possible contact with the webway activated it, or that it lay inert until it passed through a Dolmen gate. Such a security measure would keep it from being activated outside the control of its makers.
The Amunos dynasty, dead gods curse their lifeless atoms, had been renowned for their secrecy and paranoia. In moments of frustration, Orokin took pleasure in imagining the solar flare, ionizing the neural matrices of the sleeping dynasty, shock waves scrambling their tomb world's magnetic field and rendering all systems inert. Mass neural death in the span of a few minutes. Too bad they hadn't been awake to feel it. Over the past cycle, Orokin had bombarded the Mysterios with every energy wave he considered safe, spoken to it in hex decrypt, and even tried contacting any hidden consciousness through neural transference. He'd raised 12 cryptechs, in body only, minds still at rest, and installed them kneeling around the observation deck. He networked their blank minds with his to increase his analytic capacity and engrammatic storage, running theorems and suppositions until 2 of them overheated, blue flames bursting from their ocular sockets before they translated to the Resurrection Forge to be rebuilt. Nothing. He had called scarabs to clean up the ash piles when he noticed that one did not follow the swarm, one with a jeweled red backplate.
What?
He said, resisting the urge to crush it beneath his foot. The little drone knelt in a servile bow, shaking silently in his presence, its carapace scissored open to reveal a message or buculum. The chrysoprase projection juddered and flickered for a moment, resolving into the one being Orokin did not want to see.
Master Orokin, seer of the Sortek, the one called Diviner, said the tall being, staring into his eyes, as if she was standing in the room. I am Executioner Filius of the Triarch Praetorians, Herald of the Awakened Council. By order of the Council, you are to present yourself on Bekira, with immediate haste to face accusations brought by Trazyn, Overlord of Solemnes and Archivist of the— Bastard, Orokin muttered. Squeal to the Council, did you? Relating to alleged acts on Solemnes. This scarab is slave to your neural signature and will alert the Council if it detects non-compliant travel. Failure to present yourself in original body, not a surrogate, will be punished by the cancellation of your resurrection protocols. Glory to the Infinite Empire.
The image winked out, and Orokin swore, for he was going on trial.
Is he coming?
The speaker, Lord Nemesor Zubakar, rested his hyperphase sword tipped down on the floor of the dais. With a hard twist, he sent it spinning like a top, the unbalanced energy blade making a sound like a faulty turbofan as it rotated in place. Each time, he caught the hilt just before it lost momentum and fell. Thwomp, thwomp, thwomp. Catch. Thwomp, 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 thwomp. Catch.
A summons from the Awakened Council carries full force of law, said Trazyn. Orokin will come. And if it does not, Trazyn thought, You will cancel his reanimation protocol, and Executioner Phileas will hunt him down with that great execution scythe of hers.
Which was clearly the result she hoped for. She had been sharpening the great half-moon blade since they had converted, running a molecular smoother over the orbit of the power field, aligning the particles along the wicked edge. Nothing more dangerous than a bored killer.
Do you agree?
Zubakar asked the Ferak to his left.
I do,
replied Ferak Osuaria, her voice icy, furious as usual that a mere overlord was addressing her as an equal.
I concur,
said High Metallurgist Quelker, leaning forward from the platform's third throne.
This body holds authority in these disputes. So says the law.
Zubakar shrugged, spun the sword. Thwomp, 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 catch.
Cease that!
Snapped Osuaria, deigning to turn her head towards the Overlord, her tile diadem veil clattering.
It's interminable.
You may be a Ferak, Zubakar said, but you are a Ferak of the Raitak. I owe you no obedience.
The two locked oculars. Trazin had little doubt they were trading insults through interstitial transfer.
Please, my comrades, Quelker said, on this dais we are equals. It is the keystone of a great peace. Our body holds the empire together. We owe allegiance not to each other, but to the oaths we have taken.
The rivals broke eye contact and, as one, looked at the cryptek.
Not that you need reminding, he said,
shrinking back into his chair. Trazin swallowed a smile. Quelker was right, of course. Not that it would help his cause. Even before biotransference, Necrontyr society had been conservative and hierarchical, and those instincts held sway even in these strange times. After the War in Heaven, when the Catan star gods fought the Old Ones, with the Necrons as their imprisoned metal army, the Necrons had seen their chance to avenge the deception of biotransference. Rising up, they slew their erstwhile gods, shattering them into pieces and sealing the shards, each still powerful enough to level cities, in huge tesseract labyrinths. Yet, in destroying the Old Ones and the divine Catan, even the implacable Necrons had overtaxed themselves. It was clear the Eldari were the rising race, and would shape the galaxy's next great epoch. But the Metal Dynasties knew that no era lasts forever, and they had the advantage of deathless sleep. Already, Orokin had foreseen the fall of the Eldari and the rise of mankind, all of Necron kind sleeping 60 million years in stasis. The galaxy was a wild place, though, and even the genius of the cryptex had its limit. Occasionally faulty awakenings occurred, perhaps only affecting one sarcophagus, or at other times the tomb of a whole phalanx. It was entirely random, part of no plan, affecting everyone from the lowliest warriors of foot to those of the pharaonic rank like Osuaria, who had woken to find herself the only conscious being on her silent tomb world. Without the rigid class structure holding them in check, those awakened by fault fell to chaos. Some awakened whole Decurions without the aid of a cryptek, damaging the neural pathways of their fellows and turning them into automatons. Others took the opportunity to settle old scores, murdering rivals as they slumbered in their sarcophagi. It was the Triarch Praetorians, an order of cloistered warriors who'd eschewed sleep to watch over the stasis tombs, who finally insisted on the council. And they had given it to Phileas as their executioner, and Trazin suspected their spy. The Awakened Council gave the Necrons a minimalist, ad hoc government. They protected the sleepers under pain of death and set strict limits on the number and type of artificial risings. With premature resurrection so often leading to damage, no Necron was to be animated except under circumstances of dire necessity. But in a society where feuds were commonplace, its greatest task was to settle disputes with tribunals, like the one Orokin would, in a bare moment, be late to. Phileas tested the blade of her scythe on the edge of a metal thumb. Zubakar spun the sword. Thwomp, 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 catch.
One more time.
Reality shrieked and tore, lighting the death masks of the council with balefire. A rough translation, the kind conducted in a hurry.
"I would prefer we make this quick,"
said Orokin, green fire still licking in his body.
"Let me summarize," said the diviner. "I am accused of stealing an object from Overlord Trazin and destroying old, worthless clutter."
"Priceless antiquities," Trazin corrected, holding out his wooden cane as an exhibit. The inlaid wood was snapped in two, its splintered ends already decomposing from its time out of the stasis field.
"Priceless and worthless are the same thing," Orokin spat. "And I remember a time when you were all too eager to give up that hobble stick. But if you must, draw up a list and we shall discuss restitution."
"The relative worth of these subjects," Quelker said, curbing Trazin's response, "is not for you to decide, Orokin. If you admit to this theft and vandalism of a tomb world, it is a serious offense. The law prescribes banishment or death."
"A law created by this body," Orokin snapped. "A body whose authority in this matter I do not recognize."
Trazin smiled. Same old Orokin, hostile to any authority, no matter how powerful. He would fist-fight the sun if he thought it was telling him what to do. It was why Trazin had pursued this course. The diviner would build his own mausoleum, block by block.
"And why is that?" inquired Osuaria. "We have held these tribunals without challenge for centuries." "Perhaps," said Orokin, "but not with me. It is not a fair process. High Metallurgist Quelka, do you recall our dispute as young adepts?" "A long time ago, my colleague," he faltered. "The stars have wheeled quite a bit since then." "Osuaria!" Orokin snapped, already ignoring the High Metallurgist. "My lovely Ferak, I believe you still owe me a debt for divinatory services. A substantial, uncollected debt. After all, who else could have predicted where your brother the Pharaon and his 7 heirs would be on that unfortunate day?"
Osuaria stiffened. Zubakar leaned back, laughing and shaking his bulkhead-jawed head.
"Cunning my necks! You said they were lost in a void storm."
"And Lord Nemesor Zubakar,"
Orokin continued, pausing after each title.
"We've had no dealings, but the Mefrit are old enemies of the Sotek dynasty. I would not put it past you to continue that kin feud."
"I wouldn't either,"
Zubakar confessed, patting a hand on his blood-coloured chest armour. The Mefrit had never been shy about their viciousness.
"Come to your point,"
Trazin rumbled, darkly, then quieted as Executioner Phileas turned to him and placed a finger to her lipless mouth.
"In summation," Orokin continued, "no judgment you hand down will be free from the perception of bias. And given the size and stature of my dynasty, are you willing to risk the Pharaoh's displeasure when he wakes to find an unsanctioned council has executed his chief seer?"
Silence. The 3 figures sat statue still on their onyx thrones, symbols of power that felt shakier than they had a moment before.
"He would, no doubt, unleash the Storm Lord."
Orokin let that hang, then turned to Quelker.
"High Metallurgist, you campaigned with Lord Imhotep on Calliope, did you not? Perhaps you could enlighten your fellow... what you call yourselves?" "Ah, yes. Council members, about what happens when the Stormlord goes forth in his panoply of war."
Again, silence. All knew what had happened to the Kuvu dynasty at Calliope. Even now, 60 million years and several celestial wars later, gone like the Kuvu was a regular idiom in Necrontyr speech. Back when their kind still ate, it was what one said after clearing an entire plate.
"It would," began Quelker, "it would be prudent to remove the appearance of bias."
"Perhaps we should suspend proceedings," said Osuaria.
only until a suitable representative of the Sotek has arisen to oversee the proceedings on behalf of the dynasty.
It is what they would do for us,
added Zubakar, aware that the transcription scarabs would record his words, but not his disbelieving tone.
Will that serve you, Trazin of Nihailak? It damn well won't,
Trazin shouted, dialing back his venom when Phileas put up a hand.
It damn won't, he repeated, until a Sotek representative awakens. It's not scheduled for another 10 millennia, and this jackal son, the defendant, can control the stasis crypts on Mandragora. The Pharaon will awaken when he wills it. As the accusatory, I cannot accept this.
Have you a solution, then?
Orokin asked.
If this body is not willing to continue, then what else is there to do but suspend it and issue a continuance?
Trazin paused, reviewing the volumes of Necrontyr lore he'd encoded in his last decade of study. He watched Orokin smile, the diviner clearly misinterpreting his hesitation as a loss for words.
Keep smiling, Reactalik,
he thought.
If this tribunal cannot hear the case, he said, as accusatory, I assert my right to a mediator.
A what?
Orokin said.
A mediator, repeated Quelker. Yes, indeed, that is the proper procedure.
It is?
Zubakar narrowed his oculars.
When the council formed, Trazin explained, you all voted that the legal codes of old held sway in all instances, not covered by the new codes. And I assert my ancient rights to a mediator of overlord rank or above, one that has no ties to the Sotek or the Nehailak dynasties.
The council members looked at Quelker.
It is proper, the cryptic said. It could be done. But where to find a mediator?
Asked Osuaria.
Forgive me for interjecting, Ferak, said Trazin. This is a council world, one with dynastic representatives entombed below, and I'm sure the High Metallurgist could call upon his skills to raise one in safety, provided we came to an agreement on whom to select.
Trazin cast a glance at Orokin, scrying his demeanour. Though the seer's death mask remained impassive, Trazin received a glyph message via interstitial link.
Bastard!
The selection process took 2 standard years of bickering, politicking, and the occasional threat of violence. It was, in other words, a standard Necron court case. It was no accident that all dispute resolutions were, by highly practical tradition, observed by an armed executioner. More than a few cases in the ancient records ended with the phrase, "case dismissed," after accusatory's dismemberment. But finally, the council made their selection.
It has been 60 million years,
said Overlord Voksh, his orange oculars blinking with the haze of tomb sleep. He would remember soon that he no longer needed to blink.
Indeed, Overlord,
said Quelker, bending over the stasis sarcophagus, which was propped up at an angle, its occupant still within.
It would be best not to move your body overmuch, my lord. We have primarily awoken your neural matrices and vocal actuators. This will assist your re-entombment procedure afterward.
Why?
We need you to adjudicate a case, my lord,
the High Metallurgist explained.
After all, you were chosen to be the Charnovok, a representative here, were you not? I have encoded the particulars of the accusatory's writ. Do you see them?
Yes,
the Overlord hissed, one slow hand gripping the narrow steel beard that jutted from his chin and rubbing it between his fingers.
Proceed.
Trazin stood before the onyx dais, preparing his case. It was not exactly how he'd expected this to play out, but then again, trying a case a mere 12 years after an offence was almost scandalously fast by Necron standards. The sort of frontier justice portrayed in the theatrical dramas, not how things happened in reality. Trazin activated an oboculum, casting a projection of the Astrarium Mysterios in the centre of the chamber. It rotated in space, semi-translucent, surrounded by ocular captures of Orokin burglarizing.
12 standard years ago, Oricon, called the Diviner, seer of the Necrontyr, feloniously entered the tomb world of Solemnes in the attempt to steal this artifact, the Astrarium Mysterios. In his addled state, he believed it to be a prize worth destabilizing the peace for. I apprehended him, and in his escape he destroyed a host of precious cultural objects recovered from home soil.
Trazin swept his hand left and right, scrolling through the chrysoprase holograms of snapped canes, shattered vessels, a pipe with a broken stem.
These objects, how did you obtain that?
Pointed Zubakar.
The pipe.
Standard acquisition procedures, he evaded.
All above board. Go back,
said Zubakar.
That pipe's Mefrit made. It should be in our gallery.
My dear Overlord, Trazin said, Solemnes holds all of these objects in trust for the good of all our kind.
Damn that! It has my family sigil on it!
If you make a formal request through the proper channels, we can certainly arrange its return, Trazin said. He, of course, made all decisions regarding the gallery, but had always found that "we" was a magical word for deflecting blame.
But we firmly believe that these precious relics should be in a place where experts can ensure their proper preservation and display. This inquiry is not concerned with Overlord Trazin's acquisition processes,
cut in Overlord Voksh, his vocal actuators now calibrated to cancel out the sleep slur. Trazin could see why the Overlord was known for his power as a magistrate. He had a fine orator's voice, with an undeniable sense of authority.
You are in the right to protest the Diviner's intrusion, as well as his vandalism. It is no small thing, but I see no reason to pursue death or banishment. Restitution can be made through the re-engramming of several thousand Sotek warriors, and their transfer to your command, or the surrender of planetary tithes. Indeed, that may be too radical, considering your dubious ownership. Given that, why have you escalated this petty dispute so high?
Trazin reconjured the projection, settling it on the puzzle box.
This is the Astrarium Mysterios, the object of Oricon's desire. A puzzle box?
Asked Voksh.
A mere puzzle box,
said Oricon, before a glance from Voksh hushed him.
A map,
corrected Trazin.
An encrypted celestial chart. In certain esoteric corners of our society, an astrarium was used to reveal the location of occult gatherings or arcane pilgrimage sites. They can be activated by a spoken key phrase or coordinates, opening when they're at a specific point on the galactic plane. Each one is individual, and each becomes inert after its successful use. I believe this one to have been already used, or even a replica. But you no longer believe that. Oricon would not have been so rash if he thought it inert.
Trazin stared at his rival. But instead of hatred, Oricon's hooded eye was fixed on him with interest.
He suspects that it leads to a fabulous treasure. And do you have any idea where it leads?
Voksh leaned slightly forward at his casket, propping himself up on an elbow. Quelker approached him, fussing, and he waved the high metallurgist away.
Do not make us wait.
According to the encoded glyphs on its surface, Trazin said, pausing to enhance the drama, the Astrarium Mysterios leads to the tomb of Neperef the Untouched, the last natural pharaoh of the Omunos dynasty. There was a pause, then a barking laugh from Zubakar.
Neperef the Untouched? He mocked. From that god-awful long tragedy?
Yes, said Trazin.
Neperef is primarily known as a character in the theatrical drama The War in Heaven, but he did exist.
Of course he existed,
Ferak Osuaria sniped.
It's a historical play, or history-inspired at least, but to suggest that any of it resembles what actually occurred...
You remember, do you? Inquired Trazin. I mean, truly remember. Step forward, if you recall the days before biotransference. Can anyone tell me, with certainty, that the mnemonics contain a perfect record, with no deterioration during the aeons of sleep?
None stepped forward. The High Metallurgist shifted uncomfortably. They all knew what biotransference had done to them. Mnemonics of the flesh times were like the memories an adult has of childhood. One knows that one was a child, that one was born and lived years only through second-hand stories. Knows that there are friends, once close companions in youth, who are nothing but fleeting ghosts in memory. Sensations, disconnected from context. Things retained but with no memory of learning them. One knows the colour blue, but cannot recall the first time one knew its name. Indeed, it was the purpose of those mawkish stage dramas to reinforce Necron history, lest they forget. It was the reason why even oafs like Zubakar knew the characters and plots inside out, despite hating their length. They had, to be clear, grown punishingly long. Now that actors could memorize thousands of pages via engrammatic recall, and the audience had no biological needs to interrupt the performance, the forgotten Cryptek playwrights who'd contributed to the drama had gone overboard. A full performance could take well over a decade.
My research has concluded that the dramas may be more accurate than previously believed,
said Trazin. He waved towards the obuculum, summoning bas-reliefs depicting the war in heaven. Necron tier warriors and star chariots, worn free of detail by the antiquity of the carving, advanced on the Old One's doom engines.
It appears that, indeed, Neperef was called untouched due to a genetic resistance to the radiation-induced cancers afflicting our former bodies. Further research suggests that his rebellion against the Star Gods, his doom resistance to the process of biotransference, indeed occurred.
Trazin looked at Orokin. The diviner stared intently at the holographic bas-relief, rubbing one of the strands of tiles that fell from his shoulders. One tile was still missing, the one Trazin had ripped from the diviner during the struggle on Solemnes. It hung at Trazin's hip now, amidst the Aldari gemstone and other curios that dangled there, a reminder of his revenge. But Trazin had difficulty reading the diviner's mood. Apprehension, perhaps, or merely interest. How much of this did he know?
Here, drama and history diverges, Trazin said. In the drama, Neperef was killed attacking the Star Gods, scorched to nothing by the Burning One. But my archive contains an account that Neperef's own dynasty betrayed him, murdering Neferon and his followers to broker peace with the Star Gods and gain the gift of biotransference.
Quite an anticlimax,
Voksh muttered. Indeed, said Trazin. But his relatives in the Amunos dynasty, despite their betrayal, apparently wished to hedge their bets. After all, they possess the only genetically uncorrupted sample of the Necrontyr species, free of disease and blight.
Trazin swept the projection, calling up a manuscript illustration of a death procession, carrying a stasis casket into a towering gateway.
They hid the dead pharaoh in a stasis tomb complex called Sephris, hoping to return and recreate the species if they found biotransference not to their liking.
So why didn't they?
Asked Voksh.
Return, I mean.
Trazin shrugged. Unclear. But just as we cannot remember Neperef, his followers may have forgotten how to activate the device. Over time, they forgot even what it led to. Thus its name, the Mysterios. A mystery.
Fascinating, said Voksh. What purpose do you have for keeping this object, Trazin?
Trazin stopped.
He wants it for his gallery, said Orokin. To stare at it, or rather, not to stare at it. He didn't even know what he had. It was simply collect dust, a curio serving no purpose.
And what purpose would it serve for you, Oricon?
Asked Voksh.
None, growled
Trazin. He doesn't believe in a return to the flesh. Oricon wants us to be, he waved his fingers in the air, energy beings, things of light. If he found Neperef, he would likely incinerate the Pharaon to keep rival Crypteks from finding a solution that was not his. Ulterior motives, my overlord. Ulterior motives, you say? Crowed Orokin. Ask how he acquired it. It's not your time to speak, sandtick, snarled Trazin. Yes, quite right, said Voksh. But the question stands. How did you acquire this? Legitimately. Trazin turned off the obuculum, packed it in his pocket dimension. If that is all, legitimately how? Voksh pressed. It was part of a lot acquisition from the Amunos crown world of Hashtor. Tragic story, Hashtor. A solar flare from the local star triggered a failure cascade to its stasis system. It is a dead world, legal under salvage. No one moved. The Amunos had been powerful, secretive and distrusted, but their absence would be a blow. The Amunos dynasty, Trazin paused, looking around the room to let the message sink in, will not come to claim it. The council and executioner stood, stunned at the dire pronouncement. Voksh murmured in the back of his throat. That appears to be legal under salvage. Ah, goaded Orokin. But when did you acquire it? He took a step forward, tile strands rattling against his skeletal body. I have not yielded the floor, said Trazin. Did you steal the Mysterios before the Amunos died out? Or after? Because, by my auguries, you raided their vault for artifacts well before the solar flare. In fact, immediately when it became clear the solar flare would snuff them out. Your information, Trazin said with a hint of frost, is incorrect and out of procedure. Wait, said Voksh. Are you alleging that Overlord Trazin, aware of the solar flare, did not alert the Tomb World's deep spirit and instead raided it for artifacts? Just so, said Orokin. As you heard him say, the Amunos dynasty will not come to claim it. A perfect theft. He walks away with the goods, and the cosmos wipes out the victim. No one can complain. That is ridiculous, Trazin said. Villain, crowed Orokin. Plotter, traitor to your own kind. Is it true? Demanded Voksh. Keep in mind my vocal scries are on high alert. Any lie will be detected. Well, Trazin tutted in frustration. Understand there was very little time to make a decision. A groan went up from the council. No, listen, he stumbled. Awakening a tomb world takes time, at least a half-century, even under optimal conditions. To save even the higher orders would have taken more time than was available. So I focused on salvaging what I could from the material culture. Murderer! Snarled Ferak Osuaria. It is you who should be on trial, Trazin, not I, sang the diviner. I foresaw your treachery, and— Wait! Trazin motioned for quiet. You foresaw it? Of course! I foresaw the horror of biotransference, the fall of the Eldari. I have seen the coming of hungry creatures you cannot fathom, and— If you saw the solar flare, asked Trazin, why did you not stop it? Did you hope to sweep in afterward and take the Astrarium without resistance? Orokin stared, frozen. His mouth worked, giving a metallic clunk. Clunk, clunk. You misunderstood me, I think. Executioner, said Voksh. Take them both. Bastards, muttered Orokin, fingering his ritual tiles. I knew Voksh was a bad idea. The Amunos dynasty, Trazin paused, looking around the room to let the message sink in, will not come to claim it. The council and executioner stood, stunned at the dire pronouncement. Sad news, said the adjudicator from her stasis casket. She raised her head, the resurrection orbs that hung from her headdress tinkling like a chandelier. I assume you are claiming salvage rights. Trazin breathed a sigh of relief, or at least the closest he could get to one without lungs.